We are KB and Jasmine, and welcome to Beyond the Silver Screen.
All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, Tarantino.
I sent in a ton of stuff, really want to get into his films.
Yeah, what an impact. He's always sparking debate, pushes those boundaries, and his style, you just know it's him.
Exactly, but, his road to Hollywood, not exactly typical.
No, not a film school prodigy, that's for sure.
This was a video store guy. Imagine that.
Walls and walls of movies every day, soaking it all up.
No wonder he's got those references. Feels like a love letter to film history, his work does.
Totally.
But it's not just trivia, right? He does something with all that knowledge. Like Reservoir Dogs. Blew me away first time I saw it. Crime thriller, all that tension.
Trail.
But we never even see the heist.
Nope. Right from the start, he's telling us he's not playing by the rules.
Oh, he rewrites the rules, all right?
Takes the genre, but flips it. It's all about the aftermath, what happens after most films are over.
And then, boom, Pulp Fiction hits.
Culture shock, almost.
Awards, debates. What made that one so huge?
Well, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes, that's not just indie success, that's the big leagues.
True.
But also, that timeline, all jumbled up. Audiences weren't used to that.
Oh, I remember watching, trying to piece it together. Confusing, but also so cool.
It's intentional, though. He makes us work for it. We become part of the story, figuring it out alongside the characters.
Keeps you hooked, for sure. He treats his viewers like they can handle some complexity.
Which a lot of films don't.
Refreshing. Okay, so film fanatic, rule breaker, award winner. This is where we got to talk auteur, right?
It's coming up.
Basically, the idea that some directors, their films, are like personal art statements. You can just tell it's them.
Hitchcock, Scorsese.
So does Tarantino have that? Those fingerprints, those consistent elements.
Let's see. We've got the timeline jumps, but there's more. Think about the music.
Oh, yeah. Never just background noise.
Surf rock, soul. It's a character in itself. Driving the story, setting the mood.
That dance scene in Pulp Fiction with Chuck Berry blasting.
Pure Tarantino.
And it's clever, too. Foreshadowing, building tension, sometimes even ironic to what's happening.
Masterful.
Okay, I'm getting it.
Yeah.
But what about the movie references? Sometimes it feels like showing off.
It's deeper than that. It's called intertextuality.
Okay.
He's not just referencing, he's weaving in these homages to other films, layers of meaning, a dialogue with film history.
So building on what came before.
Yes. Like he's saying, I'm part of this lineage, this bigger story of cinema.
I like that. All right, we can't avoid it any longer. The violence.
The elephant in the room.
Over the top, stylized. He's known for it.
Provocative, for sure. But there's more going on.
More than just shock value.
Critics call it the aestheticization of violence. Brutality as a spectacle, blurring art and exploitation.
So he makes us think about why we're drawn to it, our own fascination with violence on screen.
Exactly. It's uncomfortable, it's in your face, makes you confront your reaction. What does this say about us?
Wow. It's like holding up a mirror to society's dark side, but with this style, this audacity that you can't look away from. It's a tricky thing to pull off.
Definitely. And speaking of style, we keep mentioning this genre bending thing, but I think we need to go deeper on that.
Yeah, he doesn't just borrow from genres, he throws them in a blender.
A master chef of cinema.
Taking ingredients that shouldn't work.
Yeah.
And creating something amazing.
But it all comes back to that deep film knowledge, right?
So there's a reason behind the mixing and matching?
Absolutely. It's about deconstructing genres, finding what speaks to him, then twisting it. His Westerns are a great example.
Django Unchained. Hateful Eight.
Those are not your typical cowboy flicks.
I remember watching Django thinking, is this even a Western? Brutal, funny, but then there's that revenge plot, almost like a samurai film.
Exactly. He takes a genre often romanticized and adds in the raw, uncomfortable truths.
About race, slavery, the violence at the heart of the myth.
He's saying, let's revisit this, but not shy away from the messy parts.
Makes you think. Okay, so we've got the style, the influences, the genre bending. But something just as important is that dialogue. So sharp, so witty.
You can always tell it's Tarantino, right?
It's like music, the way it flows.
Rhythm, flow, and often hilarious, even when things are dark.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Even mundane conversations become art. Like Jules and Vincent in Pulp Fiction, talking about cheeseburgers. And
How about massages?
hilarious, but somehow also philosophical.
That's the magic. Ordinary becomes extraordinary. Small talk becomes a meditation on life and death and everything.
It's like his characters can be profound and absurd at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, it strikes me his films are often about groups, these ensembles.
Yeah.
It's not just the lone hero, it's about how they all interact.
He's a master at that. Complex characters, multi-layered, larger than life, but still human.
Flawed, funny, violent, vulnerable, always keeps you watching.
And his casting, giving actors chances they wouldn't get elsewhere.
He sees potential others miss, casting against type, leading to some incredible performances.
For sure.
Like John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. Career was kind of fading. Then bam. Vincent Vega. Hitman with a Heart of Gold.
And the philosophical musings you mentioned.
Career defining. It shows you how good Tarantino is at getting the best out of actors. All right, deep breaths. We've covered a lot.
We have.
Unconventional journey to Hollywood, genre bending, the violence, that incredible dialogue. I'm a bit overwhelmed.
It's a lot to take in. Dense, layered, full of contradictions.
Like peeling an onion, every layer reveals something new. But still, the big question remains. Is Tarantino a true auteur?
The million-dollar question. We've been hinting at it all along, and I think the evidence is strong.
Convince me. What are the key arguments?
Well, first, that distinct style. The timeline stuff, the violence, the music, the dialogue. It all adds up to a language that's pure Tarantino.
It's true, you can spot his work in seconds, even without knowing it's him. But is style enough for the auteur label?
It's a start.
Yeah.
But auteurs also have recurring themes, motifs that pop up throughout their work.
Okay, and Tarantino's got those.
Think about his fascination with feet. Almost every film. Sometimes unexpected, sometimes a bit creepy.
I'm never going to look at feet the same way again.
But it's playful, subversive. That, plus the style, starts to build the case.
I see it.
And then there's the control he has over his films. He writes, directs, edits. It's his vision from start to finish.
Not just telling stories, but crafting whole worlds.
The essence of auteur theory. And Tarantino fits it perfectly. His films aren't just entertainment. They're expressions of him, his view, his obsessions, his love of cinema.
This has been quite the journey. We've explored his world, his style, the debates, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
And that's the beauty of it. You can revisit his films again and again, always find something new.
Like bottomless wells of cinematic riches, he invites us to keep digging, keep exploring, keep talking about it.
That's what makes him so fascinating, so influential.
Okay, before we get too philosophical here, I want to bring it back down to earth. We mentioned audience reception earlier, because, let's be honest, he's polarizing. You either love him or hate him, not much in between.
It's true. He doesn't make films to please everybody. Provocative, challenging.
Yeah.
He pushes buttons.
So why that divide? Why do some adore him while others are repulsed?
It's a few things. First, the violence. Not everyone can handle that level of graphic content. Even if it's stylized, even if it's meant to be ironic, it turns people off.
Right, and it's not just the violence itself, it's how he uses it. Mixing humor and horror, that could be unsettling.
Exactly. And then the language. Cursing, racial slurs. Some see it as realism, subverting expectations. Others, it's just gratuitous, disrespectful.
He's almost daring you to be offended, and some people take the bait, others just move on.
Taste, ultimately. But his films aren't for everyone, that's for sure.
Not meant to be universally appealing.
They provoke, they spark debate, they challenge what cinema can be.
Okay, so how do we reconcile the opposing views? Awards, critical acclaim, but also accusations of glorifying violence, being insensitive, being more style than substance.
Complex, for sure. But I think the answer is art is subjective. There's no right way to interpret a film. Especially with Tarantino, he invites multiple readings.
So not about finding the correct answer, but engaging, wrestling with those complexities, forming our own opinion.
Yes, that's what makes him so interesting. He doesn't give easy answers. He makes us think.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture, but before we wrap up this part, I want to shift gears slightly.
Okay.
We've talked influences, but I'm curious about his impact. What's his legacy going to be?
Great question. Still being debated, but I think it's safe to say his influence is all over the work of filmmakers who came after him.
Like who?
Think about neo-noir cinema, 90s and 2000s. Usual Suspects, Fargo, Brick, all owe something to Tarantino. The style, the darkness, the timelines.
It's true. And it's not just the look, it's the attitude. That swagger, that rule-breaking.
Yeah.
Very Tarantino-esque.
Exactly. And it goes beyond neo-noir. Superhero films, comedies, horror, he's part of the language now.
Like he injected a shot of adrenaline into the mainstream, reminding everyone it's okay to be bold, different, take risks.
And audiences responded. Box office success inspired a whole generation of fans.
All right, we've covered a lot, D, in this part. Genre bending, dialogue, the controversies, his impact. Wild ride.
It has been.
I'm ready for the final stretch.
Me too. Let's dive into the last part and see what else we can uncover about this cinematic enigma. It's like he's holding up a mirror to society's dark side, but doing it with this style, this audacity that you can't look away from. It's a tricky thing to pull off.
Definitely. Speaking of style, we've been dancing around this idea of genre bending, but I want to unpack that a bit more. Tarantino doesn't just borrow from different genres. He throws them in a blender and creates something totally new.
It's like he's a master chef of cinema, taking ingredients you wouldn't think would work together and creating a five-star meal. And it all comes back to that deep understanding of film history we talked about earlier.
So it's not just about mixing and matching for the sake of it. There's a purpose behind it.
Absolutely. It's about deconstructing those classic genres, finding the elements that resonate with him, and then twisting them in unexpected ways. Take his approach to Westerns, for example. Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight. Those aren't your typical John Wayne shoot-'em-ups.
Yeah, I remember watching Django Unchained and thinking, is this really a Western? It's brutal. It's funny. It's got this revenge plot that feels straight out of a samurai film.
Exactly. He's taking this genre that's often romanticized and injecting it with raw, uncomfortable truths about race slavery and the violence at the heart of the American mythos.
It's like he's saying, hey, let's revisit this genre, but this time we're not shying away from the messy, complicated parts of history.
And that's what makes his Westerns so compelling. They're not just entertaining, they're thought-provoking. They make you question everything you thought you knew about the genre.
Okay, we've talked a lot about Tarantino's style, his influences, his love of genre bending, but there's another element that's just as important, the dialogue. Those conversations are so sharp, so witty, so unmistakably Tarantino.
His dialogue is like music. It's got rhythm, it's got flow, and it's often hilarious even when the subject matter is dark.
It's true. Even the most mundane conversations in his films are somehow elevated to this art form.
Yeah.
Like that scene in Pulp Fiction where Jules and Vincent are just driving around talking about cheeseburgers and foot massages. It's hilarious and somehow philosophical at the same time.
That's the magic of Tarantino's writing. He can make the ordinary seem extraordinary, and he can turn a seemingly trivial conversation into a meditation on life, death, and everything in between.
It's like he gives his characters permission to be both profound and absurd at the same time. Thinking about those conversations, it strikes me that Tarantino's films often center around groups of characters. These colorful ensembles who bounce off each other in fascinating ways. It's not just about the hero's journey, it's about the dynamics between these individuals.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
He's a master of creating these complex, multi-layered characters who are both larger than life and incredibly human. They're flawed, they're funny, they're violent, they're vulnerable, and they're always fascinating to watch.
And the way he casts those characters, he's known for taking actors who might have been pigeonholed in certain roles and giving them a chance to shine in unexpected ways.
He's got an incredible knack for seeing potential in actors that others might miss, and he's not afraid to cast against type, which often leads to some truly memorable performances.
Think about John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. His career was kind of in a slump before that film, and then bam. He delivers this iconic performance as Vincent Vega, a hitman with a heart of gold and a penchant for philosophical musings.
It's a career-defining performance, and it's a testament to Tarantino's ability to draw out the best from his actors.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here, from his unconventional path to Hollywood, to his genre-bending brilliance, his controversial use of violence, and his gift for crafting unforgettable dialogue. I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed.
It's understandable. Tarantino's work is dense, it's layered, it's full of contradictions, and that's part of what makes it so rewarding to unpack.
It's like we've been peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer reveals something new and unexpected. But there's still one big question looming over this entire discussion. Is Tarantino truly an auteur?
Ah, the million-dollar question. We've been circling this idea throughout our deep dive, and I think the evidence is pretty compelling.
Okay, walk me through it. What are the key arguments for Tarantino as auteur?
Well, first and foremost, you have his distinct style. The nonlinear storytelling, the stylized violence, the eclectic soundtracks, the witty dialogue. All of these elements come together to create a cinematic language that's uniquely Tarantino.
It's true. You can watch a few minutes of any of his films even without knowing it's him, and you just know it's Tarantino. But is style enough to qualify someone as an auteur?
It's a good starting point, but there's more to it than that. Auteurs also tend to have recurring themes and motifs that run through their work, and Tarantino definitely has those.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, think about his fascination with feet. It pops up in almost all of his films, often in unexpected and sometimes unsettling ways. It's a quirky detail, but it speaks to his playful and sometimes subversive approach to filmmaking.
I'm never going to look at a foot massage the same way again. But okay, I see
Right.
your point. Those recurring motifs, along with his signature style, start to build a case for auteur status.
Exactly. And then you have the level of control he exerts over his films. He writes his own screenplays, he directs, he's heavily involved in the editing process. He's not just a director for hire, he's a true visionary who sees his projects through from conception to execution.
So he's not just telling stories, he's crafting entire worlds that are imbued with his personal vision.
That's the essence of auteur theory. And I think Tarantino fits that definition to a T. His films aren't just entertainment, they're artistic expressions that reflect his unique perspective, his obsessions, his love of cinema.
This has been quite the journey, I have to say. We've delved into Tarantino's world, explored his style, dissected his themes, and debated his auteur status. But even after all of this, I feel like there's still so much to unpack.
And that's the beauty of it. Tarantino's films are like bottomless wells of cinematic riches. You can revisit them time and time again and always find something new to appreciate.
So he's inviting us to keep digging, to keep exploring, to keep the conversation going.
And that's what makes him such a fascinating and influential figure in the world of cinema.
All right, before we get too philosophical here, I want to bring it back down to earth and talk about something we touched on earlier. The audience reception to Tarantino's work. Because let's face it, he's a polarizing figure. People either love him or hate him, and there's not a lot of middle ground.
That's true. He's not a filmmaker who aims to please everyone. He's provocative, he's challenging, and he's not afraid to push buttons.
So how do we make sense of this divide? Why do some people adore his work while others find it repulsive or offensive?
I think it comes down to a few things. First, his films are often violent, and not everyone is comfortable with that level of graphic content. Even if it's stylized, even if it's meant to be ironic or satirical, it can still be a turnoff for some viewers.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And it's not just the violence itself, it's the way he uses it. He often blurs the lines between humor and horror, which can be unsettling for some people.
Exactly. And then there's his use of language. His characters swear a lot, they use racial slurs, they talk about things that some people might find offensive. And while some viewers see this as a reflection of reality or as a way of subverting expectations, others find it gratuitous and disrespectful.
Like he's daring you to be offended almost. And some people take the bait while others just roll their eyes and move on.
It's a matter of taste, ultimately. But I think it's important to acknowledge that Tarantino's films are not for everyone. They're not meant to be universally appealing. They're designed to provoke reactions, to spark debate, to challenge our assumptions about what cinema can be.
So how do we reconcile those opposing views? I mean, he's won major awards. He's critically acclaimed. He's considered one of the most influential filmmakers of our time. But he's also been accused of glorifying violence, of being insensitive in his portrayals of race and gender, of being more style than substance.
It's a complex equation for sure, and I think the answer lies in acknowledging that art is subjective. There's no one right way to interpret a film, and Tarantino's work in particular invites multiple readings.
So it's not about finding the correct interpretation. It's about engaging in the conversation, wrestling with those complexities, and forming your own opinions.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes Tarantino so fascinating. He's not giving us easy answers, he's forcing us to think for ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to shift gears slightly and talk about something that's been on my mind. We've talked a lot about Tarantino's influences, but I'm curious about his impact. What kind of legacy is he leaving behind?
That's a great question, and it's one that's still being debated in film circles. But I think it's safe to say that Tarantino's influence can be seen in the work of countless filmmakers who have come after him.
Okay, like who? Give me some examples.
Well, think about the rise of neo-noir cinema in the 1990s and early 2000s. Films like The Usual Suspects, Fargo, and Brick, all of these owe a debt to Tarantino's stylish violence, his dark humor, his nonlinear storytelling.
It's true. You can see his fingerprints all over those films. And it's not just in the style, it's also in the attitude. There's a certain kind of swagger, a willingness to break the rules that feels very Tarantino-esque.
Exactly. And that influence extends beyond the realm of neo-noir. You can see traces of Tarantino's work in everything from superhero films to action comedies to horror movies. He's become part of the cinematic lexicon.
It's like he's injected a shot of adrenaline into the mainstream, reminding filmmakers that it's okay to be bold, to be different, to take risks.
And audiences have responded to that. His films have been box office successes, and they've inspired a whole generation of movie fans.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive. We've talked about Tarantino's genre-bending brilliance, his masterful dialogue, his controversial elements, his impact on cinema. It's been a wild ride, and I'm ready for the final stretch.
Me too. Let's dive into the last part of this exploration and see what other insights we can uncover about this cinematic enigma.
So we've covered Tarantino's journey, his style, the debates, even his impact on other filmmakers. It's like he's not just making movies, he's built a whole cinematic world.
A universe of his own.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What stuck with you throughout all this?
There's just so much to unpack, right?
Right.
All the analysis, the debate, but his work is still open to interpretation. That's part of what makes it so powerful. It keeps those conversations going long after the film's over.
Absolutely.
Here.
How many times have you argued about the ending of Pulp Fiction? Or the whole morality of Kill Bill? He doesn't give us easy answers. He makes us think, makes us question.
And that's key, that engagement. It's not passive entertainment. It's like he's inviting us into a dialogue with his films.
And that goes beyond the screen, doesn't it? We're having this discussion. There's articles, fan theories. It's a whole thing.
A cultural phenomenon, for sure.
It's like he's built a community around his work. People connect over their shared love or hate for his very specific style of cinema. Pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is. It shows you the power of a singular vision.
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with everything he does, you can't deny he's created something original, something that stands out.
Okay, gotta ask.
Yeah.
If you could sit down with Tarantino himself, what's the one question you'd hit him with?
Ooh, that's tough.
Mm.
I think I'd ask about that process of weaving all those influences together.
Yeah.
How does he take bits from all these genres and make them feel familiar, but also totally new?
That's a good one. For me, I'm obsessed with the soundtracks.
Yeah.
How does he know that a 70s soul song is perfect for a shootout in a diner?
It's like he's got this sixth sense for musical counterpoint.
And it always works. Can't imagine those scenes without those specific songs. They're part of the film.
Totally. And we haven't even touched on the visuals, those iconic shots, the colors, the way he frames violence, almost like a dance.
Oh, he's a master of visual storytelling. Not afraid to experiment, break those rules.
Right.
Think about the trunk shot. So simple, but so effective.
It's his signature.
You're right there in the world of the film. Secrets, danger, and those long tracking shots where the camera just holds on a character's face.
Every little emotion.
Like he's slowing down time, making you pay attention, and the violence hits, and it's sudden, shocking.
The contrast, the juxtaposition, he knows how to use it, creates such a visceral experience.
Well, I think we can all agree we've only scratched the surface here.
Definitely scratch.
This deep dive, it's been a whirlwind. So many insights, so much debate. My head's still spinning.
Mine too. But that's the sign of a great filmmaker, right? Their work sticks with you. You think, you feel, you want to keep exploring.
So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this. What's your Tarantino story? Which film hit you hardest and why? What conversations did it spark for you?
Don't be afraid to revisit those films, analyze them, argue about them.
Most importantly, keep talking about them. Keep that dialogue going.
That's what Tarantino would do.
He'd grab some coffee, light up a cigarette, and launch into this passionate, opinionated, and utterly captivating discussion about the power of cinema.
That's something worth celebrating.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.